It seems like everywhere you turn these days, everyone's talking about cybersecurity. And for good reason, right?
Mm.
I mean, think about it. So much of our lives are online now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not even really a question of if you'll encounter some kind of cyber threat at this point. It's more about, are you prepared? Do you understand the landscape well enough to stay safe?
Exactly. And that's exactly what we're going to be diving into today.
Awesome.
We're going to be taking a deep dive into different types of cybersecurity.
Okay.
We've got this really interesting document here called Types of Cybersecurity, and it really lays out all the different areas that we need to be thinking about when we talk about cybersecurity.
It's a great overview. It gets into some really important stuff.
Yeah.
So, a lot of times people think of cybersecurity as this one big thing, but it's actually a whole collection of different, strategies and practices. And the document does a really good job of breaking those down.
Yeah, it's almost like cybersecurity is like an umbrella term for a bunch of different specialties, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like its own little universe with all these interconnected parts.
I like that, cybersecurity universe.
Okay. Yeah.
So let's start unpacking some of these areas.
Okay.
One that I think is just like the most fundamental is network security.
Right.
When we talk about a network, I mean, we're talking about how all of our devices, our computers, our phones, everything are connected, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like the
Absolutely.
internet itself is a network.
Exactly. The invisible web that lets us communicate and share information.
Right. And so network security is about making sure that infrastructure is protected. The document mentions firewalls as a really important part of that.
Oh, yeah, firewalls.
Yeah.
I feel like everyone's heard of those, but do they really understand what they do?
Well, think of a firewall like a security guard for your network.
Okay.
It checks everything that's coming in and going out, and if it sees something suspicious, it blocks it.
So it's looking for things that don't belong.
Right. Exactly. And the really cool thing about modern firewalls is that they're not just looking at individual pieces of data, they're looking at the whole context of the communication.
So they're analyzing the flow of traffic, not just individual packets.
Oh, exactly. And that makes them much more effective at spotting and stopping attacks.
So it's like they're not just checking IDs, they're like profiling people based on their behavior.
Haha, kinda.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, the document also mentions intrusion detection systems. What are those, and how are they different from firewalls?
So an intrusion detection system, or IDS, is more like a security camera for your network.
Okay.
It's constantly watching for any suspicious activity that might have gotten past the firewall or even originated from inside the network.
So it's like a second line of defense.
Exactly. It's always on the lookout for anything unusual and can alert administrators if it detects something fishy.
And what about encryption? That's another big one we hear a lot about, especially with websites and online transactions.
Right. Encryption is like putting your data in a secret code. So even if someone intercepts it, they can't read it without the key to decode it.
So it's about protecting the confidentiality of information as it travels across the network.
Exactly. Like sending a letter in a sealed envelope instead of a postcard.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've talked about how to protect the network itself.
Right.
But what about the stuff that's actually running on that network?
Right. The applications and software we use every day.
Yeah, like our web browsers, our email clients, all the apps on our phones. How do we keep those secure?
That's where application security comes in. It's all about making sure that the software itself is secure from the ground up.
So it starts with the developers who are writing the code, right?
Exactly. They need to follow secure coding practices, which means writing code in a way that minimizes vulnerabilities.
So it's like building a house with strong foundations, not just pretty windows.
Exactly. And then they also need to do a lot of testing to make sure there aren't any holes in the code that attackers could exploit.
So it's like stress testing the house to make sure it can withstand a hurricane.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
And then even after the software is released, they need to keep patching it to fix any new vulnerabilities that are discovered.
So it's a continuous process of making sure the software is as secure as possible.
Exactly. And it's really important because if an application has vulnerabilities, attackers can exploit them to do all sorts of nasty things.
Like what?
Well, the document mentions SQL injection and cross-site scripting as examples.
Oh, yeah, those sound familiar.
SQL injection is when attackers try to sneak malicious code into an application's database queries. If they're successful, they can steal data, modify it, or even delete it.
So they're basically hijacking the database.
Exactly. And cross-site scripting is when they inject malicious scripts into websites that are then viewed by other users.
And what can those scripts do?
They can do all sorts of things, like steal login credentials, redirect users to malicious websites, or even deface the website itself.
That's pretty scary.
They can be, yeah. That's why application security is so important.
Okay, so we've talked about protecting the network and the applications.
Right.
But what about the information itself, the actual data that's being stored and transmitted?
Right. That's where information security comes in. It's all about protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data.
Okay, break that down for me. What do those three things mean?
Confidentiality means keeping data secret from unauthorized access.
So making sure only the right people can see it.
Exactly. Integrity means ensuring that the data is accurate and hasn't been tampered with.
So no one's messing with it without permission.
Right. And availability means making sure that the data is accessible to authorized users when they need it.
So it's there when you need it, but not when you don't.
Exactly.
And how do we achieve all of that?
Well, encryption is a big part of it, of course.
So same concept as with network security.
Similar, but in information security, we're also talking about encrypting data at rest, which means encrypting it while it's stored on servers or hard drives.
So even if someone breaks into the server room, they can't read the data without the key.
Exactly. Another important aspect is data access controls, which means limiting who has access to what data based on their role and need to know.
So not everyone has access to everything.
Exactly. It's all about minimizing the potential damage if a breach does occur.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've covered networks, applications, and information.
Right.
Now let's talk about the devices that we use to access all of that. Our laptops, our smartphones, our tablets, what about those?
Those are our endpoints, and securing them is what endpoint security is all about.
And this is especially important because our devices are often the weakest link in the chain, right?
Absolutely. They're the most vulnerable to malware and phishing attacks because they're directly in the hands of users.
And it's not just our computers and phones anymore.
Right. No, it's everything. The Internet of Things, or IoT, is bringing all sorts of new devices online, like smart thermostats, security cameras, even refrigerators.
Yeah, it seems like everything's getting smart these days.
And that means more potential entry points for attackers. So endpoint security is more important than ever.
So what are some of the key things we can do to protect our endpoints?
Well, antivirus software is still a must-have.
Even though it feels kind of old school?
Yeah, but it's still effective at blocking a lot of basic threats.
Okay.
But these days, you also need more advanced solutions like endpoint detection and response, or EDR.
What does that do?
It continuously monitors your devices for any suspicious activity and can automatically block threats or alert you to them.
So it's like having a bodyguard for your devices.
Exactly. And it can be really helpful for catching those more sophisticated attacks that traditional antivirus might miss.
That makes sense. Okay, so now we need to talk about the cloud. I feel like that's where everyone's storing their data these days.
Yeah, cloud computing has definitely changed the game. And cloud security is all about protecting your data and applications in that environment.
And this is a shared responsibility, right? The cloud providers have to do their part, but we as users also have to be responsible for our own security.
Exactly. You can't just assume that the cloud providers do.
To secure our cloud data.
Encryption is still crucial, both for data at rest and data in transit.
Okay, so encrypt everything.
Pretty much. You also need strong authentication and access management to make sure only authorized users can access your cloud resources.
So strong passwords and multi-factor authentication.
Exactly. And you also need to make sure your cloud environments are properly configured and monitored to prevent misconfigurations that could lead to vulnerabilities.
It sounds like a lot to keep track of.
It can be, yeah. But the good news is that a lot of cloud providers offer tools and services that can help you with all of this.
Okay, that's good to know. Now, we've talked about securing networks, applications, information, endpoints, and the cloud. But what about the people who are accessing all of those things? How do we manage their identities and control their access?
That's where identity and access management, or IAM, comes in. It's all about making sure the right people have the right access to the right resources at the right time.
So it's like a digital bouncer, deciding who gets in and who doesn't.
Kind of. But it's also about making sure that people only have access to what they need to do their jobs.
So minimizing the potential damage if someone's credentials are compromised.
Exactly. And there are a lot of different techniques that can be used to implement IAM.
Like what?
Well, multi-factor authentication is a big one.
We talked about that a bit earlier.
Right. It's that extra layer of security beyond just a username and password.
So something you know, something you have, and something you are.
Exactly. And then there's role-based access control, or RBAC.
What's that?
It's a way of assigning permissions based on a user's role within the organization. So instead of giving each individual user specific permissions, you just assign them to a role, and everyone in that role gets the same permissions.
That sounds a lot easier to manage.
It is. And it also helps to ensure consistency and reduce the risk of human error.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about securing networks, applications, information, endpoints, the cloud, and managing identities and access.
Right.
But even with all of these security measures in place, things can still go wrong.
Yeah, that's true. You can never be 100% secure.
So what do we do when the inevitable happens?
That's where disaster recovery and business continuity planning come in.
Okay, I've heard of those terms, but I'm not really sure what they mean.
Disaster recovery is all about having a plan in place to restore your IT systems and data after a major incident, like a cyber attack or a natural disaster.
So it's like having a backup plan for your backup plan.
Exactly. And business continuity is about making sure that your business can continue to operate even if your primary systems are down.
So it's like having a backup office and a backup team ready to go.
Exactly.
So disaster recovery is about getting the technology back online, and business continuity is about making sure the business can still function.
That's a good way to put it. And both are absolutely essential for any organization that relies on technology.
Wow, we've covered so much in this deep dive. It's amazing to see how all of these different types of cybersecurity are interconnected.
Yeah, it's really a holistic approach.
And it just highlights how important it is to have a layered security strategy.
Absolutely. You can't just rely on one or two things. You need to have multiple layers of defense to be truly secure.
And as the threats continue to evolve, we need to keep adapting our defenses.
That's right. Cybersecurity is a never-ending race.
Well, I definitely feel like I have a much better understanding of the cybersecurity landscape now. This has been a really helpful deep dive.
Glad to hear it.
And I think it's important for everyone to be aware of these different types of cybersecurity, even if you're not a tech expert.
Absolutely. Cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility.
So as you go about your digital lives, think about what you've learned today. What area of cybersecurity do you think is the most critical in today's world, and why? Is it securing our increasingly vulnerable devices, protecting the massive amounts of data in the cloud, or maybe something else entirely? Let us know your thoughts.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
And be sure to stay tuned for more deep dives into the world of technology and how to navigate it safely and effectively.
We'll be back soon with more insights and tips.
Until then, stay safe online.
And stay